I think it's important. It's interesting just to see where SB277 is, and hopefully we can, I think the biggest piece of this, we'll go through some pieces, but definitely, you know, keep your questions and we'll either answer them along the way or at the end, but definitely, you know, post any questions you have in the chat or later we can sort of open it up. But it is all about answering your questions and giving you the information that you know, as much information as we can.
Absolutely. And I have to say, so the way I've got the slideshow on my computer, I'm using Google Drive, and it's not going to let me see the questions while the slideshow is presenting. So if Christina sees a question come up on her side of things that she wants to answer or let us know she feels like it's really relevant, we'll interrupt the slideshow to do that. But for the most part, we'll probably do most of the slides, most of the questions after the slides. We'll have a section for that. Okay, so we are now recording. So again, welcome. My name is Jennifer Schmidt. I am a nurse, a naturopath, and an intuitive. Most of all, I'm a very passionate parent of 3 kids. My kids are 12, 14, and I have a daughter who's going to be 16 in just a couple of weeks. So this topic is near and dear to my heart, and I welcome you all with open arms. I'm going to get the slideshow up and running. Let's see, here we go. See if it'll let me present it, Google. Yeah, Google's going to be a little bit weird. Whoops. So again, welcome to our class SB277, What Parents Need to Know to Make an Informed Decision. And again, I'm Jennifer Schmidt, and I'm co-presenting this class with the wonderful Christina Hildebrand from A Voice for Choice. So our agenda today, first we're going to have a little disclaimer, very important. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, Christina's not a doctor, she's not a lawyer. So we'll get the legal stuff out of the way first. We'll do some introductions. We'll talk about what the class will not cover. There's some things we can't cover in the class. We'll take a brief look at the risks of vaccination versus natural disease immunity. And then we'll dive deep into SB277. So what is SB277? Some of the vaccine mandates by grade level. I tell you, when I was first looking at that, it was so illogical, the way they set up the mandates. It makes no public health sense whatsoever. And then we'll talk about exemptions. We'll talk about the lawsuits that are currently in place at the federal and state level. I actually didn't put it in the agenda. There's something that I call the Hail Mary, which I'll talk about. And then we'll dive into parent resources, how to proceed from here, and then we'll go into our Q&A. So here's our disclaimer. This class contains the opinions and ideas of its authors and is designed to provide useful advice in regard to the subject matter covered. The authors are not engaged in rendering medical, therapeutic, or other professional services in this class. This class is not intended to substitute for medical care or legal advice. The authors expressly disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the contents of this class or its handouts. So reiterate, the information presented in this class does not constitute legal or medical advice and should not be interpreted as such. If you were having this class in person, I would have you all sign a consent and a disclaimer that you are aware of that. So by being present at this webinar, at this online, or if you're listening to the recording, I want you to raise your right hand and say, all right, I will not take the information presented in this class as legal or medical advice. Super important, especially as we get later on into the program. So I'm Jennifer Schmidt. I have a lot of letters after my name. I have a master's degree in nursing. I'm a registered nurse. I'm also something called a certified clinical nurse leader, which is a new role in nursing that was designed to help prevent medical errors and to really improve patient outcomes in multiple ways. I'm also a certified public health nurse. And believe it or not, there are a lot of public health nurses kind of hiding in the wings who are very passionate about advocating for parent choice. So I founded Oasis Wellness in 2014. I'm a nurse, a naturopath, and an intuitive. I've been researching vaccines for 16 years. I was staunchly pro-vaccine until the day that my daughter was supposed to get her 2-month shots. And at the time, my now ex-husband, my kid's dad, was like, can we just like look into this a little bit more? So then we called a friend who was a physician. He was chief of emergency medicine at a hospital back east. And he was into alternative medicine. He was into all sorts of things. And he said, you know, I can't tell you legally not to vaccinate your children, but I would tell you that if it was me, I would not vaccinate my children. And I would do my homework first so that I made a fully informed decision. Well, I tell you, this rocked my world. And the research that I've done, it's been like opening Pandora's box as far as what I've learned, and which is so different from what I was taught, believing some of the party line about vaccines. My work, I help build the family case that you can give to your MD or DO. I do not and cannot give medical exemptions as a registered nurse, but I can help people build the case for medical exemption. And if you want to reach me at any time, you can always email me at jennifer@earthbasedmedicine.com. I'm super happy to introduce Christina Hildebrand. When people were pinging me about SB277, what are they going to do about it? What can they do? I knew I needed to teach a class, and I knew the person I wanted to teach it with was Christina. She is the founder of A Voice for Choice and A Voice for Choice Advocacy. She has been a tireless voice, present in Sacramento. I don't even know how many nights of sleep she lost when SB277 was going through the legislature. She's appeared in the media as a voice for all of us parents. She has been researching vaccines almost as long as I have, and she really advocates for informed choice. Christina, I'm going to let you also introduce yourself too. Want to say a few words?
Sure. I guess just from a bit of background similar to yours, I started doing research 11 years ago when my oldest daughter was born, and I got into it because I had a completely natural childbirth. Was so concerned about what was going into my body during my pregnancy, ate organic, made sure I didn't eat all the stuff I wasn't supposed to eat, ate the stuff I was supposed to eat. And then I had my birth plan, and I went through it. And as I went through it, the Hep B shot was on it. And to me, it was kind of like, well, hang on a second. Hep B is a sexually transmitted disease. It's not a contagious disease. Why would my 12-hour-old baby need this shot? And that, we talked to our doctor, our pediatrician, and she said, that's not one of the ones that you absolutely have to have. Why don't you do your research? Because you can always put them in you and you can never take them out. And that just started me down a rabbit hole. I'm a researcher. My real job is in market research. And so I'm a type A personality. I'm a researcher at heart. So I just went down the rabbit hole and keep going further and further, which is a bad and a good thing. But basically, have realized that I made the choice because of the research I'd done. I had a doctor that was supportive, and I feel like everyone should do that research. And whether you come out on the side of vaccinating or not, I personally believe once you start doing the research, there's no way you come out on the side of vaccinating. But if you do decide to do that because you feel the risks of the disease is greater than the risks of the vaccine, then that's your choice. And that's kind of what A Voice for Choice is founded on, is that piece of informed consent and transparency. So, when usually most people who go into the doctor's office at 0 days old, 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, or 2 month, 4 months, 6 months, they line up the shots, and you go in and you're told, okay, these are the 6 shots they're getting today. And there's no information, there's no conversation that happens. And so I had the idea of A Voice for Choice in my head about 5 years ago, but I had 2 businesses, 2 kids, and not much time, and decided that it was what I wanted to do when I retired. Well, SB277 came along, and so it got pushed up a few years. And I really feel strongly about this. I also, A Voice for Choice is firmly grounded in the vaccination piece, but it also goes beyond that. We do work on the water fluoride and other, things like GMO labeling, that kind of thing that we have interest in. We don't necessarily, something like GMO labeling, there's a lot of other groups that are doing that, so we're not as active in that, but we definitely support that. Basically, we want you to know what's in everything that's going in your body, and for you to make the decision whether you want to put that in your body or not.
I love that concept. I think that's really important. And I think that's why you're all here, is because you are conscientious and conscious consumers, not just of organic food or organic lifestyle, but also of really your healthcare and wanting to take control of that. And I know I'm so grateful for the work that Christina has done advocating for all of us. She's really, really stepped up, and we're so lucky. So this class is not going to cover individual health conditions that might warrant a medical exemption. Everyone is different. If there are 60 people listening to this class or watching it, there are going to be 80 different ways that things that could warrant a medical exemption. So we're not going to talk about specifics here. That's something that we could do in a session with me, or you can do with your doctor or other people. We're not going to talk about specific genetic testing markers. That's really such a blossoming field. And again, I think it's too much detail to get into in this class. It's really something that would pertain to you one-on-one with your healthcare provider. We're not going to talk about homeoprophylaxis. Now, this is something where some families choose to build natural immunity through homeopathy. That's what homeoprophylaxis is. It's building long-term immunity through homeopathy. We're not going to discuss that today. And we're going to not going to cover how to strengthen the immune system naturally. A lot of you are pretty well versed in that already. If you need more information about it, you're always welcome to hit me up as a resource. Christina has a wonderful company called Real Food Bay Area. If you are local to the Bay Area, you can get all sorts of wonderful, healthy food products that will definitely help to build your immune system. So we're going to take a brief look at the risks of vaccination versus natural disease immunity. And some of you I know have read a book called Dissolving Illusions, or you've done some homework. But for those of you who haven't, it's really important when you're educating yourself about vaccination and about SB277 to look at the US infectious disease mortality rates from about 1900 to 1963. And these are pretty much mirrored for the UK and parts of Europe as well. But you can see that rates of diseases, so mortality rates mean death. And the death rates from these diseases started to come down, particularly with typhoid and diphtheria in the first 20 to 30 years of the 20th century. And this has been attributed to improved sanitation, access to water, less crowding, the development of the automobile because you didn't have horses walking through the streets pooping anymore. And you can see, for instance, by the time the diphtheria vaccine was introduced in 1920, deaths had dropped considerably. And then when the whooping cough vaccine was developed and used more widespread in the late 40s, the death rate was almost zero. This is the same for the measles vaccine when it was introduced in 1963. People were still getting measles, but they weren't dying from it. So we have improved sanitation, improved nutrition, better living environments. I mean, you can imagine, when Upton St. Clair wrote The Jungle back in Chicago, what the streets of Chicago were like back then. Not a place that I would want to be.
I think the other thing to, sorry to butt in, Jennifer, I think the other thing to note here is that there was never a scarlet fever and a typhoid vaccine, yet those two things have been eliminated from our society, and the death rates also went dramatically down. So, saying that vaccines are the reason why the number of deaths and even the number of cases goes down isn't necessarily the case.
Absolutely. And what's interesting about scarlet fever too is the rates went down before the widespread use of antibiotics.
Right.
I mean, you go to the doctor now with strep throat, and I mean, you gotta take antibiotics. I mean, like they will push that on you because that's the only Western cure for it. But the reality is that people were doing pretty well already back in the first half of the century as those rates were coming down. So you can get a lot more information you can get a lot more data like this from the wonderful book by Suzanne Humphreys called Dissolving Illusions. I can't speak highly enough of that book. It's beautifully written and footnoted. If you're a data geek like me, then you'll get a lot of that info. And you can't argue with numbers like these, or at least it's very difficult to. So the results of a large prospective CDC-funded study comparing health vaccinated individuals to slow vaccinated, so parents who are spreading it out, to non-vaccinated children, it's never been done. We don't have that data. So all of the vaccine safety studies that are done for the individual vaccines. They don't look at child health, basically, from age birth to 18, and to see what is the health of my child versus your child versus someone else's child who might have been fully vaccinated and really followed that schedule. We don't have that data. And for me as a nurse, this is a crucial piece of the puzzle that is missing. And we've been clamoring for this kind of a study for years, but the CDC won't do it. And I'll explain a little bit later why they won't do it. But really, this is a huge gap that when people say, well, the research has been done and vaccines are safe. Well, no, honestly, the research has not been done. And we really have to take that into consideration when we're looking at injecting a child with something like 64 to 71 vaccines by the time they're 18. We're really not looking at that. What we do know is that the US has the highest infant mortality rate of the quote unquote developed world. And it is directly correlated. They've done a study, Neil Miller did a study, and it's directly correlated with the number of vaccines. They can correlate infant mortality with the number of vaccines that a child receives in the first year of life. Here in the US, I believe it's at 26. Christina, is that correct? Do you know?
I think it's around that, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a huge gap. So this is something to take into consideration if you are considering selectively vaccinating or doing any vaccinations for your child. This is something you need to consider, and this is something you need to bring up with your healthcare provider. So again, there has never been a long-term study to verify the safety and efficacy of the current CDC vaccine schedule. So anytime you hear Paul Offit from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia or Senator Pan say that, yes, Virginia, these things are safe, there's no study. So that's really important.
And I think the other piece to note on that is even the studies that have been done, and I don't know if we have this in another slide, so I may be jumping ahead, but even the studies that have been done are not double-blind placebo tests that are similar to pharmaceuticals. So that's another thing that, the research that's being done is not comparable to any other drug on the market.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I did not put that in any of the slides. I'm glad you brought that up because yeah, it's true. They're using aluminum in their placebos. Right. So instead of it being a strict saline injection, they're putting aluminum in it. Well, aluminum's a known neurotoxin. In fact, so if you look, it's kind of a confusing document. This is the current vaccine schedule. So you can see all of the different things that children are supposed to get. Now, this is the official CDC document. And what I really want to point out, I don't know if you guys can see my little cursor. It's not letting me do the circling with Zoom. But you can see this is diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis is one shot. It's 3 different vaccines. 3 different diseases. MMR, measles, mumps, rubella. It's 3 different diseases lumped into one shot. Tdap, same thing, tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis in one shot. So this is not super accurate in that it doesn't list the individual diseases. It's based on the vaccines that are available, and you cannot get tetanus separately. I know a lot of people who would consider vaccinating against tetanus. You can't get it separately. You can't get the measles vaccine separately. You can't get rubella vaccine separately if you're, thinking about getting pregnant, but you don't have the immunity to rubella. You got to get MMR if you want all 3, and I know a lot of people who don't want to do that. So this is the current schedule. They start Hep B at birth, which just makes me want to scream bloody murder because it's just wrong. But you can see the different schedules. So this is what's basically expected of us for our children. However, again, something else to consider, these are some of the ingredients in vaccines. So we talked a little bit about aluminum. It's a neurotoxin. Formaldehyde is a known carcinogen and neurotoxin. Yeast, getting injected directly into the bloodstream. Thimerosal, that's a type of mercury. It's used now primarily in the multi-dose influenza vaccines. It used to be found in RhoGAM, which is the, for women who are, I'm totally blanking on it, have that positive protein in their blood or negative protein in their, like let's say the woman is A negative blood type and the man is A positive, there could be an immune reaction for a second pregnancy or second child. There is now a class action lawsuit against Johnson & Johnson for that thimerosal present in the vaccine. However, we are not allowed to sue the pharmaceutical manufacturers for the thimerosal present in the vaccines. Human albumin, that means we have human proteins found in vaccines. We don't know how that impacts our health. MSG is present in vaccines. Human lung fibroblasts, again, we have human tissue in vaccines. Guinea pig tissue. Antibiotics are in vaccines. Those are used primarily as preservatives. And neomycin, for instance, is toxic to the ears and toxic to the kidneys. Fetal bovine serum, it's another way of saying fetal cow tissue serums. Human diploid cell cultures, that's human cells primarily found from, they usually take those from aborted fetuses. So if that's something that is not sanctioned in your religion, something to think about. Gelatin, recombinant human albumin, that means that they've taken the human protein and they've mixed the DNA up. So it's not the same as the human protein, but they're still injecting it into us. Egg protein, probably responsible for the rise in egg protein allergies that we're seeing. Soy peptones, we have a lot of people who are sensitive to soy, which is an endocrine disruptor. And peanut oil. Peanut oil is found in vaccines and it's not listed on the ingredients. And I don't know about you, but I know several children who have to carry EpiPens because of their nut allergies. Christina, do you have anything else you want to add to that one? To that slide?
Yeah, just to give a little bit of background on vaccines and how they work. So many of these things are, or at least the aluminum and the aluminum specifically is what's called an adjuvant, which stimulates, the way vaccines work is they have something in them that stimulates your immune system, hyperstimulates your immune system, so that the virus that is in there, that your body reacts to that virus. If they didn't have the adjuvant, which stimulates your immune system, then you, the amount of virus that's in those vaccines would not cause a reaction or wouldn't cause you to create antibodies. And so what happens is that in that stimulation of your immune system, it's also stimulating your autoimmune system, and it's sort of hyperstimulating stuff, which is why when you look at peanut oils or eggs or soy or MSG, yeast, those types of things that are in some vaccines, it gives kind of an explanation as to why people become allergic to them, because their body has sort of hyperstimulated to something else, but it's also hyperstimulated to the other ingredients in there. So there's just some background of why having peanut oil in a vaccine could be the reason for being there. It's not, and also to note, it's not listed on the ingredients because it's a product that is what's called GRAS, G-R-A-S, which is generally regarded as safe. So anything that is generally regarded as safe is not necessarily included on the ingredients list in a vaccine package insert.
Great. And and to add to that as well, an infant's immune system and a child's immune system is not as strong as an adult's. So that's another reason why they need to add the adjuvants like aluminum, because the body, an infant immune system isn't going to recognize those toxins that are, a measles antigen that's coming in. It kind of goes, meh. But when they add, so as Christina was saying, when they add the heavy metals like aluminum, they have to hyperstimulate the body so that it recognizes the immune system, so that it recognizes the antigen, the disease coming in. All right, so we're going to dive now into SB277. I'm going to let Christina take over most of the presentation. Christina, just give me a holler when you want me to go to the next slide.
Okay, sounds good. So what is SB277? And I know most people on this, listening will probably already know this, but I'm just going to go through an overview just so that the people who don't know, who have come to this sort of later on in the game, have the overview. So it was a law that was passed last year in 2015 that removes the religious and philosophical exemptions for entry into daycare, preschool, private school, and public elementary and secondary schools. So all schools that you have a child go to. It does still allow for not vaccinating if you are homeschooling. I should also say that California never actually had a religious exemption in the law, in the statute. It was just a philosophical exemption. There wasn't a religious exemption on the personal belief exemption that came into law in 2014. But other than that, it was the philosophical exemption that was in there. There are only 2 other states in the U.S. that have a similar law. One is West Virginia, the other is Mississippi, and they basically eliminated the religious exemptions to vaccinations. Interestingly enough, they rate 49th and 50th respectively in infant mortality rates in the US. And so, as Jennifer mentioned, there is this correlation between the number of vaccinations and the infant mortality rates. And we'll see where California ends up, but those 2 do have the lowest or the highest infant mortality rates. I should also say, you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Jennifer, but I should also say that one interesting thing is that the US has the highest first day death rate of infants. So that first day, the US in the developed world has the highest first day death rate, which is also very concerning. We're also one of the few countries that recommends the hepatitis B vaccine on that first day. SB277, so by grade level, daycare or preschool, we're going to go through each grade level. The way the law works is that there are entry points. If you had a personal belief exemption prior to January 1st, 2016, that personal belief exemption is grandfathered in. And from now on, there are 3 entry points. One of them is preschool or daycare, one of them is kindergarten or TK, and one of them is 7th grade. And so as of this year, unless you've been grandfathered in, so you had a personal belief exemption on file prior to the January 1st of this year, these are the mandates of what vaccinations you have to have. So for daycare or preschool, and I should also say, I should back up a little bit, the 3 times you don't have to have these. One of them is if you have a medical exemption. One of them is if you homeschool, in which case you're not actually going into preschool or daycare. And one of them is if you have an IEP, an individualized education program, which is for children who have some kind of learning disability.
Yeah, and we have, those exemptions are right there.
Sorry, yeah. The IEP is probably the grayest area, because there are some districts that are saying you have to be vaccinated even if you have an IEP. Other school districts are saying that they will let you in if you're not vaccinated and you have an IEP. So I'm pretty sure we'll get into the lawsuits later, but I'm pretty sure there'll be lawsuits over that. The other piece is you can have a conditional admission, and conditional admission is that you go to the school and you say, my kid isn't up to date with the vaccinations, but I'm going to start vaccinating. And one thing to keep in mind there is they have a very specific schedule that you have to be on, and a timeline that it goes along with that. So you can't say, oh, I'm just going to go conditionally enter and I'm just going to do it on my own schedule. If you go for a conditional admission, there's a very specific prescribed schedule of what vaccinations your child has to have. So that's just something to keep in mind. I know there were people that saying, oh, I'm just going to go first day of school and say I'm not up to date, but I'll get up to date. But they will look for specific vaccinations in a specific timeline. So you can go back to
they will hunt you down.
Yes. So by grade level, for entrance into daycare or preschool, you have to have 4 DTaP, 3 polio, 3 hepatitis B, 1 Hib for infants 15 months or older, 1 MMR, one chickenpox. There are others that are on the CDC schedule that are not included, which are PCV, Hep A, rotavirus, and influenza. So if you're following not the CDC schedule, you can go with less than the CDC schedule. What's interesting, if you go into preschool or daycare, you're required to have the HIB. The HIB drops off if you go to the next slide. The HIB actually is one of the ones that drops off when you go into kindergarten, so you don't need that if they're under 5 years of age. They're under 5 years of age, you do, but for over 5 years of age, which most children going into kindergarten are, it's not required. But for the entrance into kindergarten, and one thing I will say, in California, you're not required to go to school at kindergarten. So you first grade is when you have to enter school. So that's something that some parents have been sort of waiting this year, especially if their children are entering kindergarten this year. They're waiting to see what happens for this year, whether we can get a lawsuit that overturns it, whether there'll be other legislation, just to sort of buy that year, and they're homeschooling or they're doing some other program for that year. For entry into kindergarten, you need 4 DTaP, 3 polio, 3 hepatitis B, the HIB if you're under 5 years, which most children at kindergarten are not, 2 MMR, or titers after the first vaccine, 2 chickenpox or titers after the vaccine or illness. So if your child has had the first MMR, you can get titers tested, and if they show immunity to those 3 things, then they don't have to have the second vaccine. The same thing with the chickenpox. If you've had the chickenpox, or if you have showed titers after the first vaccine, you don't have to have that. There are places that test for titers for pertussis and tetanus and diphtheria, and that's one place that it isn't specified in the code of regulations that you can get a titer test, but I'm guessing that if you got titers tested and a doctor were to write a note, that you could also get titers for those tested.
Probably, yeah. And I want to go back too for a second to this slide, just to note, which I didn't put in the slides, is that MMR is not, and chickenpox are not recommended in children under 12 months of age.
Right.
If you have a child going to daycare before 12 months of age, again, this is a sticky point, because if a child gets the MMR and chickenpox vaccine, sometimes they get what's called MMRV, which is the 2 combined, then they have to get a 3rd shot, or they have to get an additional shot, because their immune systems really just can't do anything with that. And
this, my recommendation is, if you've got a child going into preschool, there is an adjusted schedule. So if you've got a child going in at 3 months old, there's a certain list that they have. If you have a child going in at 12 months old, there's a certain list that they have, and that is on the I believe it's on shotsforschool.org. That's a website that the California Public Health Department has regarding immunization or vaccinations for SB277 and under this law. Great. So if we go to 7th grade, at 7 to 11 years old, so this is entry into 7th grade, which is the next checkpoint. So once you've gone through kindergarten, right now, they don't check your medical records again until 7th grade. When you get to 7th grade, you're required to have 1 DTaP, 3 polio, 1 MMR or titers, 1 chickenpox or titers, and so that's on top of what they had at kindergarten. So they have to have at least had these things, but the Tdap is the one thing that they'll check for. They'll check for the rest of your vaccinations that you're up to date, but the one thing that you have to have within sort of around just before 7th grade is an additional diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, booster.
Right. So just to go back here for a second. So let's say your child has been homeschooled, or I know several families who have moved to California with the tech boom from other areas. And so their child is coming into 3rd grade and they don't have a personal belief exemption on file. These are the vaccines that they would be required to get. So you can see it starts shrinking. So 14 or 15 vaccines for kindergarten. They come in between age 7 and 11 with no previous vaccinations. It's 9. Yep. And then if let's say you're coming in from out of state, or you've been homeschooled up until this point, or there's just no PBE on file, no personal belief exemption on file, it only requires 6 vaccines. And interestingly, Hep B is not included in that. So it seems that they're more worried about infants and kindergartners getting a sexually transmitted disease than they are about our middle schoolers and high schoolers.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because the UC Regents and we'll get to this too, but they just updated their policy and they actually removed hepatitis B from their
that's
requirements.
new. Wow.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that, they're, and I think part of it is because most people get it at birth anyway, so they figure that they've got them covered already. But it's interesting that as you get older, they're taking that restriction away, which is something that you would expect that they would add.
Right. Okay. So then this slide is, that's just changed from the time that I created the slide. So this is incorrect that it says 3 Hep B here. So go ahead.
So the UC system, so for most colleges in the US, they still have at least a religious exemption. They either have a religious or a personal belief exemption in place. The UC system which University of California has implemented a new system or new policy, and they are planning to implement it as of 2017. So this may be correct for 2016, but for 2017, they've implemented which is something that we're fighting hard against, but they've implemented a policy that is actually 100 times more stringent than SB277 is. So they have the required vaccines which are these ones that are listed here, but they've taken the hepatitis B off, but they don't allow any medical exemption that is at the discretion of the doctor. So the medical exemption that they are requiring has to be in line with the CDC contraindications, which honestly, if you have the CDC contraindications to vaccines, basically said that you've either died or you've had an anaphylactic shock and are permanently disabled. If you've had either of those things, you're certainly not going to the UC system. So that it's something that we're as a Voice for Choice, we're working on with other groups to kind of get this policy changed, because the other thing that it does is, there are children this year that are grandfathered in from 8th grade to 12th grade that will be going to college that have a personal belief exemption, don't have to be fully vaccinated in order to go through high school, but yet once they hit, if they go to the UC school, want to go to a UC school, they hit that and they'll have to be vaccinated. So it's probably one of the other pieces, one of the most important pieces on the vaccine mandates that we're working to bring down.
I'm definitely hoping that, so the way they've set up their medical exemptions it has to be vetted by a committee.
Right.
Includes an infectious disease specialist and I don't know who else.
Yeah, and it has all of their people on their, what I call the tribunal. It's not a tribunal, but you have to basically bring up your medical exemption, and you have to show that you have to basically try and tell them why you should have a medical exemption. And if you think about it, I mean, realistically, medical exemption should be between your doctor and you, and your doctor knows best. So why anyone else should be making a decision on a medical exemption that you have from your doctor just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so I'm hoping a physician will stand up at some point and say, that's ridiculous. But or someone, Christina, would you expect a lawsuit to come out of this, or some type of
I think there probably will be something that comes out of it. I mean, I think that we're looking at different sort of top down, bottom up ways of having college students and having going to the regents and sort of having a multifaceted approach to try and sort of reason with them and tell them that this is just they've gone a few steps too far on this.
Yeah, and by the way, this just applies to the UC system. As of this recording, it does not apply to the CSU system, the California State Universities, or the community colleges. Now, whether or not they follow suit based on the UC example, it's hard to know. But the UC systems all have medical schools attached to them.
Well, in the medical school, so if you're going to medical school, the list of vaccinations is much longer than this list.
Yeah. Yeah, but but the UCs also have med schools, right? So a lot of that university's funding is coming from pharmaceutical companies. CSU schools do not have associations generally with pharmaceutical companies. So hopefully those will stay free and clear. All right, do we want to talk about exemptions anymore? Do you want to touch more on that?
No, we can, I mean, we can, is there, so the only other piece that I would say, this is what I wanted to say. So the only other piece that I would say is, what constitutes a medical exemption under SB277? As I mentioned, it is very much up to the discretion of your doctor. It has to be signed by an MD or a DO who's licensed. Actually, this is incorrect. They don't have to be licensed in the state of California. They can be. So this is actually incorrect. They can be out-of-state providers. You can anywhere in the world you can have as long as they are a licensed doctor.
Oh, interesting. I took that off of one of the documents. I'll have to go back and check that out. We'll follow.
And then it has to show certain. So the pieces of information that need to be on the medical exemption is that you have to. It has to be from a medical doctor. It has to be. It has to state whether it's permanent or temporary. It has to state whether it is for all or some vaccines. And if it's some vaccines, then it has to list which vaccines it's for. And it has to give a reason for it. But it can be a generic reason. And it's really up to and I would recommend, if you have a doctor giving you a medical exemption, that you make it a generic reason, even if it is, I mean, it needs to be a specific reason that your doctor and you have come to, but when it comes to what's actually on the medical exemption, you want something that is generic, because it is not for your school to decide whether or not that is a valid reason or not. It is up to the discretion of the doctor, and we've been coming up against that in some school districts, that they have basically been just saying that they have the decision making process of whether they accept your medical exemption or not. The way the law is written, and actually if you read Governor Brown's signing statement, he specifically says it is at the discretion of the doctors. So there's stuff going on behind the scenes on this as well, that is being questioned. But I would also say that the other thing, that if you do have a medical reason and you do have a medical exemption, that when you put that medical exemption on file with your school, that you also put a document, and it's on the Our Voice for Choice website, and I can share it with anyone who wants it as well. But basically a document that states that you do not want your children's records shared with anyone. You can make it specific to medical records, vaccination records, but I would do it for all records, personally, that you don't want it shared with anyone, because one of the things that's happening, we know in both Santa Barbara County and Sacramento County, we've got public record requests out to all other counties to find out if there are any others. But what they're doing is they're basically asking, those public health departments have asked schools to send in the medical exemptions of all of the children that have medical exemptions in their district. They've now, initially they were just asking for them. We had a lawyer that sent a letter to the Santa Barbara one, and Sacramento looks like they followed that as well, where they're redacting the children's information, but it does have your doctor's information still on it. And our personal belief is that they're doing that because they want to cull the doctors and work out who the doctors are. One thing that I've had conversations with my senator, with other legislators about this, and one of the concerns, and one thing everyone should be aware of, is there are only a certain group of doctors that are giving medical exemptions, and the reason behind that is you have two other groups of doctors. You have a group of doctors that work for the large corporations, that work for Kaiser, that work for places like Stanford, UC Berkeley, all of those that have medical divisions in their universities, and other big corporations. Those corporations are funded by the pharmaceutical companies. They get a lot of their funding from the pharmaceutical companies. And so they're not going to go against vaccinations. They're going to say, if you are part of us, you need to, you basically aren't getting medical exemption, you're getting vaccinated. The second group is the group of physicians that are not associated with large corporations, but they're physicians that take health insurance. And so the health insurance companies are compensating doctors for having children up to date with their vaccination. They get up to $400. Some may be more, but we have documentation from Blue Cross Blue Shield that they give physicians $400 if their children are up to date with all the CDC required vaccinations by 2 years old.
And that's per child. That's $400 per child. So if you have 50 2-year-olds in your practice, you're making a lot of extra money. The other thing is, if a doctor doesn't
do that and says, I don't care about the money, what the insurance companies do is they actually say, if you don't have a 95% or higher vaccination rate, we're pulling the insurance from you. So we're pulling your coverage from Blue Health, Blue Shield, or whatever the insurance company is that they have. And these doctors rely on that insurance to bring them clients, to bring them customers, because most people rely on health insurance to cover their health needs, especially with Obamacare, where we have to pay for health insurance. And so it really puts them in a bind where they're almost forced to give vaccinations to comply and to keep their patients. So you're left with this group of doctors that aren't intimidated by the insurance companies, usually don't take insurance. And so you're left with a very small number of doctors that are actually willing to do what they think is right and to give you a medical exemption and to evaluate you for a medical exemption purely on who you are rather than on what's driving their financials. And so that's why the concern is that, for these counties and for the authorities that are asking for the medical exemptions, will they find just a few doctors that are giving medical exemptions? Yeah, they will, because there are only a few doctors that are, in line with this thought process and can go outside of what their institution is telling them to do or what their insurance company is telling them to do. So it's just sort of probably more than what people wanted to know, but it just gives you kind of a background of why it's important. We really need the doctors that we have that are giving medical exemptions, we really need to protect them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I also want to bring up that I personally, as a health advocate, I feel that SB277 definitely discriminates against low-income families. When we talk about the lawsuits, we'll get into that a little bit more. But really, the testing, the genetic testing, doing some of the blood markers, getting a well-documented medical exemption is not an inexpensive process, because insurance generally doesn't pay for a lot of these tests, right? It's not in the insurance company's best interest for you to go out and get all these tests. So you often have to pay out of pocket. A lot of the practitioners a lot of the physicians who are able to write the medical exemptions, and just as Christina was saying, they're able to financially to turn down some of those, the patients who, because of the insurance issues, they do not accept insurance.
Right.
And so, I know that when I'm helping people build a case, I can't accept insurance. I don't accept insurance. And so it's an out-of-pocket process that can get pricey. Now, is your child worth it? I think so. But, we all have those decisions to make. So just something to keep in mind, that it's not the medical exemption is let me rephrase that. It can be a difficult, lengthy, pricey process, but it's definitely one that if you feel that you have a legitimate concern. For instance, I had one of the things that woke me up to vaccines is I was given a vaccine 2 days postpartum after my first baby, and I thought at the time that it was just rubella. We don't know, because the nurse violated federal law because she didn't document the vaccine in my chart. So I don't know the lot number, I don't know the expiration date, I don't know what happened. What I do know is that I developed arthritis from the vaccine. So then that's common in 25% of women who get the rubella or MMR vaccine develop arthritis. So I have now a legitimate reason to be concerned for my children to receive vaccines, because if I had a reaction to one as an adult, what could happen to them as a child? So these are the things that you really need to discuss with a healthcare provider, either someone who can build the case for you that you can then present to a doctor, to an MD or a DO, or with an MD or a DO directly. Losing Dr. John Hicks a few months ago was a great loss to the two parents everywhere, because he was a formidable advocate for parents. He was an expert in the field. He knew what he was talking about. And so we do definitely want to protect our physicians who are writing medical exemptions. I also want to reinforce, and Carrie Doolittle, if you're out there listening, if you want to just ping me through the Q&A and correct me on this if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, and Christina, you can correct me too, but as far as I know, schools cannot ask for the diagnosis codes for the medical exemption.
No, they can't. Some schools have been asking for that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that's private healthcare information. So if they're saying to you, well, you have a medical exemption, what's the and I think that's one of the things Santa Barbara was doing is they wanted the diagnosis, why the child was getting an exemption, and they cannot ask for that information.
Well, so it's a gray area, and I'm going to go and answer. I know you can't see them, Jen. But I'm going to go through and answer a few of the questions that pertain to medical exemptions here. Somebody asked, what would the generic reason for a medical exemption be? So you have to give the reason why, or the doctor has to give the reason why why they're giving a medical exemption. But rather than saying it's a family history of thyroid, cancer, whatever the reason is, the doctor should just put the generic things are things like a family history of autoimmune disorders, a family history of vaccine reactions, a personal history of previous vaccine reactions, those kinds of things that basically give the information but don't give too much information. Somebody else asked why it's not covered by HIPAA or privacy laws. So HIPAA is between the doctor and the patient. Once you hand over your medical exemption with that diagnosis, that we're saying should be generic, but once you have that diagnosis, once you hand that over, you basically have said to the school, I'm fine with you. I'm giving you the information and sharing that with you. Which is why we say make it generic or as generic as possible. The place where you're, what they may be violating if they share that information is FERPA, which is the School Records Act, which says that if they share it with anyone else, and this is where Santa Barbara County and Sacramento County can ask for the medical exemptions legally, if the name of the child and the personal information of the child is redacted. So if they cross all that out, they can send the medical exemptions through legally. I'm going to go through some of the other questions. Somebody else asked if you have a 6th grader going in this fall and you want to get a medical exemption, should you start the process now? I would. I would get the medical exemption. I wouldn't put it on file until you get to 7th grade, but I would get the medical exemption as soon as possible, so that you have it, and if something comes up that you have that for yourself. Quite a few of the doctors giving medical exemptions won't give them if your child's in 1st grade. They say, and you have a personal belief exemption, they're saying, come back to me at 6th grade, because I don't want to give them out right now. There's no reason to have one, which I think is fair enough, especially because they want to protect themselves. But I would not put, even if you have a medical exemption, I wouldn't put it on file until it's absolutely needed. Somebody asked about the vitamin K shot. Vitamin K is not considered a vaccine, but yes, it's given at birth to most children, to most infants, unless you say something against it. And one thing to do your research, so no vitamin K shot is just vitamin K. It has other crap in it. Some of them have aluminum, some of them don't have aluminum, but it has other crap in it. So definitely, I would say, if you're giving, if you're pregnant and you're going to have a child, look into the vitamin K shot as well. And somebody asked about the titers for the MMR. Yes, they do require titers for measles and mumps and rubella. So if you have titers tested, you need them for all 3 of those diseases, not just measles.
Mm-hmm. And going back to vitamin K, it is legal in California to refuse vitamin K. They just put it in your record. In some other states, it is not. You cannot refuse it. But here in California, you can. Yes.
For the titers, for the college age, you can have titers, I believe, for the MMR and for chickenpox. I don't know about the Tdap, and that's one I know there are companies that do the Tdap titers. So, but I'm assuming if you had titers for it, then they would be fine with you not getting.
Pertussis is controversial. There's no agreement among scientists, physicians, about what constitutes a pertussis titer, but. Tetanus is fairly well agreed upon that if you have a certain level, then you are immune, which of course, tetanus is not a communicable disease, right? So it's kind of a weird, illogical point. But pertussis, it really depends on who's looking at the record.
Yeah, and then, so somebody asked about level of titers. So the companies that do the testing have those levels. I'm not familiar with what they are, but they have the levels of them. Another question was, if your child has a personal belief exemption on file with a school previously, and is changing schools, so as long as you're not at the kindergarten or the 7th grade checkpoint, that personal belief exemption should go from that school's file to the next school's file, as long as it was on file before the 1st of January 2016. So, and there are some schools that have questioned that and have said, no, we won't take it, you're entering school. It's well documented that yes, it should be grandfathered in and it should transfer over.
Yeah. And if you guys have questions about titers, by the way, about specific labs and things, ping me via email. Send me an email at jennifer@earthbasedmedicine.com and I'll get you that information about labs for titers and things. I have specific labs that I work with.
Yeah, and the information, so the information should be kept. There's a question about sort of the privacy piece again. The information should just be kept in your child's file. Your child's file is not sort of open record for any teacher or any person to walk in and say, but I just don't trust the people in the school system. Some nurses are very careful about what gets shared, but I think there are other schools that are definitely going beyond their reach. There are schools that are making it their job to do more than what SB277 actually says, and I do believe they're not doing it out of spite. I think there may be some people out there that are, but I think for the most part they're doing it because they really want to implement this and really they're just gung-ho about it and often don't know any better. So we've had parents that have come to A Voice for Choice who have had children in the school system where they've submitted a medical exemption and they've asked for the diagnosis code, they've asked for a waiver that school can contact the physician, and their claim is that they're doing it from the perspective of if your child has some illness or something wrong with them, we want to be able to talk to the doctor about it and to make sure that we can cover that illness. And I don't know how much of that I believe or not, but if anybody asks you for a waiver to sign any waiver, don't do it. Like, you can have a medical exemption on file. I would absolutely sign a piece of paper that states that you do not want any of your students' records shared with anyone at all. They are closed in their file and you don't want them shared without your knowledge. And then I would also say that there are schools that are just sort of, they are doing it for the sake of sort of trying to be on top of things, but I don't think they know any better. And so I would just be very careful and cautious and keep to the very basics. When you have a medical exemption or a personal belief exemption on file, just stick to the basics and just give them all the very bare minimum of what they require by the law.
Great, thank you. All right, lawsuits. Do you want to cover that, Christina? You want me to?
Sure, I can cover that.
Go ahead.
So there are 2 lawsuits that are against SB277. I'm going to go backwards: the state case and then the federal case. So the state case was filed in April of this year. There are 8 individual plaintiffs in California versus about 100 defendants. It seeks immediate reversal of SB277. And it's sort of against the right to school. It's been updated recently to include a few other things. The religious exemption is in there. One thing I would say about this lawsuit is and I would encourage everybody here to do their own research on this. I'm giving you my opinion of it. It's my personal opinion. It's not something that we've actively said as publicly as SB2 as A Voice for Choice, but I'm happy to, I would say it to somebody under that as well, is that the lawyer that is involved in that case is a questionable lawyer. His name is Todd Matthew Phillips. If you Google him, you will see a lot of stuff he's a cyber bully is what it basically comes down to. And there are a lot of people that have fought hard against SB277 over the past 18 months that he has defamed and just gone against. So I just, do your own research there. You can come up with your own opinion of whether you, whether you support him or not. Again, A Voice for Choice is all about informed choice and making your own decisions. So do your own research there. The federal case that was filed July 1st was filed on July 1st because that's when the law went into effect, when SB277 went into effect. There are 10 plaintiffs. There are individuals and there are groups. One of the groups is Weston A. Price Foundation. There are 10 defendants. So there are the California Health Department, the Department of Education, 3 school districts, the Santa Barbara County Public Health Department, and various employees of those organizations. And it sought an immediate injunction of the enforcement of SB277. It actually had a temporary restraining order request, which was denied by the judge based on not on the content, but on just the way that he didn't see that it was necessary. They are filing an injunction, which would again stop it before the enforcement of before the start of the school year. I would say this case, personally, Jim Turner, who is the lead lawyer on this, is an amazing lawyer. He's been doing vaccine law for many, many years. He's supported by Robert Moxley, who is also one of the top top lawyers on the religious side of things, the religious exemption side of things. He testified at the SB277 hearings. So they've got an amazing legal case, or lawyers, and the legal case is very sound. The one thing I would say, which again goes against a Voice for Choice's piece, is that there's just not enough transparency on this. The brief looks really good, but there's just not enough transparency on where their money comes from, where their funding is, what their sort of what their plan is, and so that's the only concern that we would have with that case. There is another case that I'll mention that's not on here, that isn't SB277 specific, but there's an organization called IPAC, which is the Independent Applied Pure and Applied Knowledge group, and they are putting together a lawsuit against the CDC, stating that the CDC has not done due diligence on vaccine research on the infant schedule that they're recommending. And so that's it's a federal case. It's against the CDC. It's another one that there hasn't been a brief. They haven't filed anything yet, but it's up and coming pretty soon, I believe. And that's another one that I would say is one to just follow. It has, again, I'd like more transparency on what they're doing, which they haven't shared yet, but they are, I think they will have the transparency. I also think that the other 2 cases will have the transparency at some point. It's just not there yet.
Yeah, great. Thank you. As far as a state case, I had mentioned that SB 277 was discriminatory against low-income parents because the assumption is that, well, if you don't want your child vaccinated, that you can just pull them out of school and homeschool them. But that presents a real hardship to single-parent households. So I know there's at least one of the plaintiffs in the state case, at least, is a single-parent mom who is saying that the law would present a hardship for her, because how would she work and be able to provide for her daughter and her family if she has to homeschool? So that's just one of the angles that I know they're taking on that. All right, so the Hail Mary, and Christina doesn't know about this. I'm going to exit my screen for a second. I'm going to stop sharing. All right, so I am now going to put on my parent hat. I'm not going to present this information to you as a nurse. I'm going to present it to you as a parent. And I really went back and forth of whether I should give you this information or not. But the reality is that if I feel like it's my obligation to give you as much information as you have to make an informed consent. Make an informed decision for your child. So I'm going to share my screen once again as a parent, and I want you to see this. This is a vaccination notice that has never been tested in a court of law. It is, I hope you guys can all see my screen. It's not been tested in a court of law. I have no idea if it would be upheld in the court of law, but I'll tell you that this is a documentation that I use for my children. I do not have a personal belief exemption on file because the wording of it scares the crap out of me. If you read the wording of the personal belief exemption, it will say to you that you're basically requesting exemption, which they can come and take away at any point. So this is a document that is online. We're going to get into some pretty heavy political stuff in the moment, so I'm sorry if I offend anybody. But again, I want you to have all of the tools in your toolbox that you can. Anything in red is something that you would change. This was designed for the state of Ohio because their personal belief exemption is a nightmare. And so basically what it says is that as a parent, we do not, we cannot legally harm our child, right? And so it's this idea that vaccines can cause injury or illness, and that basically, until we receive the package inserts, we've not been given full disclosure regarding any vaccine. And the little CDC public health information sheets are not acceptable alternatives. Reason for this is that the CDC, the vaccine schedules established by the CDC and promoted by the public health departments and all of the American Academy of Pediatrics are not science-based, because all of these organizations, and this was new information to me up until about a year or two ago, is that the CDC and all of the departments of public health are all public corporations listed on Dun & Bradstreet. And so, as is the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Family Physicians. They're all public corporations. So their compensation from the vaccine manufacturers contributes to the fiscal health of their corporations. Christina already went into the fact that physicians are paid higher reimbursement rates for the administration of vaccines. And so legislators have no medical training. And so this is a document that you can sign, you can personalize it and sign it. It has to be notarized. It basically says that you're denying anyone permission to administer a CDC recommended vaccine unless they provide you with the insert, allow you to determine if the health risks are acceptable, and that they personally will be responsible for any injury or illness the vaccine they administer might cause. We did not touch at all during this presentation about the vaccine adverse event reporting system or about the vaccine injury compensation, which is very poor. It's very, very hard to get financial, what's the word I'm looking for? To win a suit, to win financial claims against vaccines, because the vaccine manufacturers are exempt from lawsuit. Physicians and nurses who administer vaccines, pharmacists who administer vaccines, medical administrators or medical assistants who administer vaccines are exempt from any type of punishment, basically, if your child gets harmed by a vaccine. Now, they're supposed to write down the lot number. They're supposed to write down the expiration of the vaccine, but sometimes they don't. And even if they don't consent you properly, if they don't give you informed consent, you still can't sue them. So this document takes that away. I urge you to Google it. It's called Vaccine Notice. And you can just Google Vaccine Notice Ohio. I'd prefer not to give it to you. I'd really prefer not to email it to you. I mean, you can say you got it from another parent, but I want this out there, because this is a potential for those of you coming in from out of state who don't have a personal belief exemption, or those of you who feel weird about the personal belief exemption. This is potentially an option. Like I said, I don't even know if the California legislature has seen this documentation. I don't know if they're going to accept it, but that's a Hail Mary that I'm throwing out there for people. Use it at your own risk, like everything else you're getting in this presentation, okay? I'm going to go back to, actually, I think I want to go back to now parent resources.
And just to clarify on this, I think, I mean, it's a good resource to have. It will not, if you don't have a personal belief exemption on file prior to January of this year, a school wouldn't take this as a personal belief exemption or an exemption. Like, you have to have a medical exemption on file as a form of exemption. So it's right now, the way SB277 is worded, giving this to a school wouldn't you could try it, but you would have to. You could try it and you could fight it, and it could become a lawsuit. But most schools would reject you.
Yeah, a lot of the schools look at it. I mean, I do know schools that have accepted it after the personal belief exemption kind of ran out on January 1st. So again, they kind of look at it bug-eyed. They don't really know what to do with it. And I think they just kind of stuff it in your child's file.
I think they stuff it in your child's file, but I think if your child is at a checkpoint,
yeah.
they wouldn't accept this to allow them into school.
Yeah. So again, that's something that just to kind of, stick in your toolbox, and potentially you can use it as a Hail Mary, but go over it with a lawyer first. All of these things, you can always try to go over with a lawyer first as well. I want to talk about some parent resources quickly. A Voice for Choice is obviously one of your greatest advocates here about SB277. Christina's a phenomenal resource. She's really done her homework. You're always welcome to ping me. I'm at earthbasedmedicine.com. I have some blogs that I've written about vaccination. I have a podcast that I think would serve you all well regarding insurance. So if you're fed up with your Anthem Blue Cross, there are some insurance alternatives so that you can have better choice for your providers. So that's a resource for you as well. I highly recommend reading Dissolving Illusions by Suzanne Humphries. And I'm sorry, I know there's a co-author who I haven't listed here, is Roman. And I'm sorry, Roman, if you're listening. That's a incredibly thick, well-researched book with lots and lots and lots of footnotes and studies going all the way back to the 1700s. And again, we didn't really talk too much about the history of vaccination. It is quite a dramatic soap opera. It's been an argument that's been brewing really since the 18th century. I highly recommend 2 documentaries. One of them is called BOT. You can access BOT for free at www.earthbasedmedicine.com/BOT. And then the movie Vaxxed, which was recently released. There was a whole lot of brouhaha about it because it was pulled from Tribeca Film Festival. And Andrew Wakefield is the director of that. It's very, very well researched. I like the points that they make in the movie. You can find showings at www.vaxxedthemovie.com. People are trying to bring it back to San Jose. I don't know if they're going to be successful, but I know they are trying to bring it back. Christina, do you know of any showings in the near future?
Well, I would say, so they went from theatrical release, which is being in the movie theaters because the theaters wanted it, to what's called Gather, which is basically a crowding movie theater showing. And so I would go to the Gather site and look up Vaxxed. It's showing all over the US. Basically, anyone can set up a showing. You just have to get a certain number of tickets sold. I don't know. I haven't looked recently. I know there are LA area, Bay Area, San Diego, and across the US. There are theaters all over the place. So I would go on there and see if there's a place near you and sort of promote that. I'm going to go through just to come back to, there are a number of questions regarding both the medical exemption and the lawsuits.
We're actually, I will go back to this in a second.
Sorry, I thought you were finished with that.
That's all right. Let me, I'm going to stop the screen share and you get to see our lovely faces so that we can see the questions. Go ahead, Christina, go ahead and answer them.
So going back to the medical exemption, one thing, there's somebody who's called Anonymous Viewer. Yours are pretty specific. If you want to email me directly, Christina at avoiceforchoice.org, I can go through your exact situation and let you know what the deal is there. Somebody asked, you also asked about the health form that you're made to fill out from schools. So schools will have a health form that says, what's your medical insurance numbers, information, what are allergies, what's the school allowed to give with respect to over-the-counter medicine or those kinds of things. Those you are required. Most schools require you to fill that out in order for the child to be allowed on campus. I would say fill those out. I always put a disclaimer on the bottom. They usually have a note section that states that any medical procedure or specifically vaccinations, that they are not to give them without specific parental consent. They do have usually a piece in there that says, and you can say yes or no, can they treat your child, or can can the school allow your child to be treated in an emergency situation? I think for most people, that's a case where you say yes. If your child has fallen, broken their leg, and they get them to the hospital first, or something worse, that for emergency reasons, that's okay. Again, it's up to you to make that decision for your child. But I would say, I would say on there specifically state no vaccinations to be given without parental consent, direct parental consent. Somebody else asked again about the generic reason for the medical exemption. I don't know whether that person got that, but basically something that just says that it's a family history of autoimmune disorders, family history of vaccination reactions, those kinds of things. If you have a doctor that's looking to give a medical exemption that's not sure about how to put it down, again, have them contact me. I have the little blurb of what the sort of generic, or what the statement should say. So there was also a question of the required doses that we had on those lists. They're the required doses for that entering age group. So if your child is 7 to 11, that's all that is required by the law. And again, for those different age groups. So for kindergarten, the number of vaccines that's required is a lot higher than if you had, say, a child that was homeschooled and going into 7th grade. So that's that piece. I think that's, trying to see where there was a thing on the chat too that had a question.
Yeah.
There was a question on the on the lawsuits. So the lawsuit, why is it a federal case? It's a federal case because it has both. They wanted to put it into the federal court system. So the federal court system allows it to rule over California and over sort of the greater federal piece of it. It gives, if the lawsuit is successful, then it gives greater jurisdiction because it's at a federal level. The reason why they can do that is because it is grounded in SB277, but it does go beyond it, for example, for a religious exemption. So the federal law is where the religious, because it's that amendment in our Constitution that says that you can practice any religion and you can't be discriminated against because of that religion. That's a federal piece that they're arguing. So although it covers some state stuff that it's arguing, they took into the federal court because they do feel that they have a better chance at the federal level. So it was a decision that was made by the lawyers. If you wanted more information, there's definitely the lawyers are the people to talk to, not me. But that's from my understanding. That's why they did it at a federal level, because they feel that they have a better chance, and it does. They have sort of other laws that they're fighting that they're arguing against in the lawsuit that are on a federal level rather than on a state level. Somebody asked about the organizations that asked for vaccines to participate, such as Girl Scouts. So Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts is an interesting one. They've recently come out with saying that for this year's camp that they require, and for participation, that they require vaccine notices or records. When you actually ask them to show you that policy, they don't have such a policy, and they basically say, oh, it doesn't matter. So my recommendation, if an organization requires you to have, ask for vaccine records to participate, ask for their policy, ask for it in writing, stating that they require vaccines. If it is a private entity, a private corporation, they can require that. As a private entity, you can require a whole bunch of different things. Now, is it legal from a discriminatory perspective? It is, because it is and it isn't. I think there's a lawsuit that'll come up there as well. Can they require it? Yes, they can, for the same way that they can require other things. But I would definitely ask for their policy, and I would talk to them personally about it. Many of them, if you have a personal, especially with the grandfathering in of the personal belief exemptions, if you have a personal belief exemption, often they'll say, oh, well, yes, we're just going by the SB277 guidelines. Okay, well, fine, my personal belief exemption works for me there as well. The other question was about IEPs. Do you have a suggestions for an IEP wishing an exemption? How's that done? So the IEP is the place where I would say there is the grayest area for this, for SB277. So under the Federal Disabilities Act, under IDEA, every child with a disability has the fundamental right to go to school, to public school, have a free and public education, which means that any child that has an IEP can go to public school. However, the SB277 is very gray in that area. So there are some schools that are interpreting, SB277 states that you can, you cannot be denied services defined in an IEP. So services, the way IEPs are written, are very different for each child. They're very child specific. So some students, it may say, your child is required, Joe should be 50% of the time during recess interacting with other children on the playground. So that's something that a teacher would look for, is that, and if Joe isn't doing that, they would encourage Joe to go over and play with their classmates. Well, if that's all that your IEP says, and usually IEPs say a lot more than that, but if that's what your IEP says, then what happens the rest of the time if you're not at recess? Does the child go to school? Does the child not go to school? If your child is, if your IEP states, when your child is in the classroom, they should use an iPad or a device. Does that mean when your child is in the classroom? What does that mean? When is in the classroom? So one of the things with IEPs that we recommend is that when you have your IEP, you should specifically put or specifically ask them to put that your child, it is in the best interest for your child to be in school 100% of the time, because that basically says that if your child is required to be, or it is in the best interest of your child to be in school 100% of the time, then the child can be in the school 100% of the time without being vaccinated, because that's what SB277 has. But as I said, different school districts are interpreting this differently. For example, the LAUSD school district basically said, I believe it was LAUSD, it's LAUSD and Orange County are the two school districts. I can't remember which one said one thing and which one said the other, but one of them said, I believe it's the LAUSD. LAUSD basically said, you can go into school with an IEP and not be vaccinated. We're not going to look at your vaccine records if you have an IEP. Orange County said, as I said, it may be the other way around, but I'm pretty sure it's this way around. Orange County said, if you have an IEP, you are still required to be fully vaccinated, regardless of what your IEP says, regardless of that's what you are. So there are two school districts right next to each other saying very, very different things. So it's really that piece of it is on an individual school district level. You can try and have an IEP and try and talk to the school district and find out what their interpretation of the law is. The California Department of Public Health is very, very, very vague about this. And I think they're very vague about it because they don't want to have a lawsuit by saying one thing or another. But the federal law does say that any child with a disability should have full access to a free and public education.
Christina, I just want to say quickly, someone was asking, what does an IEP stand for?
Oh, sorry. An IEP is an individualized education program. So when a child has a disability of any sort and they go into public school, they will have and it's identified that child needs additional help for whatever reason. They're not sort of in line with the normal schooling and not able to keep up with normal schooling, whatever that may be. They go through an IEP process, which is basically there are a number of different people that come together. Your child's teacher, the principal is often involved, specific therapists or specific people that have, it could be an occupational therapist, it could be a physical therapist, it could be different types of therapists depending on what the issue is with your child. They come together and they put together this individualized education program. So how your child will be taught or will be in the school system, and what adjustments will be made to compensate for your child.
I want to answer Melanie Ann's question that she just posted is, why is it that only disabled children have the right or the access to education regardless of vaccination status, but normal non-disabled children don't? And believe it or not, homeless children have the same rights. If your child is homeless, they do not have to be vaccinated. And again, it just goes to show you that SB277 is not about public health. It is about money, and it's about politics. It's not about public health, because if that was the case, then they would be like, come on, homeless children, like, let's get you vaccinated. Like, it's not even, they don't, because, and I think the other thing I think that with the IEP as well, there is this idea that some of the children have IEPs, they have these learning difficulties because of vaccination that they might have gotten in the past.
Right. And I should say one thing, so that is part of the federal case as well. So the California Constitution is different from any other state's constitutions in that our Constitution states that every child has the right to a free and public education. So our Constitution does hold that, and it's why SB 277 is considered unconstitutional. When we brought this up to the Governor Brown's office, to many of the legislatures, their answer was, well, if it's unconstitutional, then it will be thrown out in the court of law. But we're going to pass it because we think it's a good thing. And we're paid by the pharmaceutical companies. That's like the point.
Yeah. I want to answer CC's question. She says, 2 of my children were in the UC system starting in 2008. Neither was required to vaccinate. I was surprised, but no complaints. Just curious what happened there. Are these mandates new for the UC system? Yes. They are new for the UC system, and they really snuck it in there. Yeah. I mean, it was not like a big announcement like, hey, we're changing vaccine laws. It was like, they just suddenly put it in there that they're not going to really enforce it in 2016, but by fall of 2017, you cannot register until those documents are in your file.
Right. Well, and to note, what's interesting is the UC system previously did not have any requirements, because the way it was worded was they assumed that if you have gone through public or private school in whatever country, in this country, I think they had different requirements if you were from out of the country, but in this country, if you had gone through private or public school or even homeschooling, that you were up to date on your vaccinations, whatever that meant. If you had a personal belief exemption, then that was the requirement. You met the requirement. So they didn't actually have any requirements. They had a hepatitis B. The only one that they had was the hepatitis B requirement, but that had a religious exemption. I believe it may have had a philosophical exemption, but it had a religious exemption. But as I said, they got rid of the hepatitis B requirement, which is kind of interesting. I'm going to go to some of the other questions. Is there a group forming to protect the small group of MDs, DOs willing to write medical exemptions? There is a group of physicians that have come together, and they're working together on that. They have, they work very closely, and they're putting together information on that. I would say if anybody wants / needs a medical exemption, send me an email. We do have a list of doctors. We don't publish the list of doctors. We don't share the list of doctors. We will find the doctor that is most suited to you. We are pretty stringent in vetting you, so don't be deterred by that. It's just we are concerned for those doctors, and we do protect them very, very significantly. So the other question was, were there lawsuits in the other 2 states? If so, what was the outcome? There have been lawsuits in the other 2 states, I believe. They didn't go anywhere. Basically, and in those 2 states, the medical exemption being the only exemption, and they actually have a stricter medical exemption in those 2 states. I believe in at least one of them, the state health department reviews every medical exemption and says whether it's okay or not okay. And so those states, but they have had those medical exemption onlys for years and years and years. And I think there's just no grounds in those states for contesting it. They have been contested, and they were basically dismissed out of court. So and I do believe, I don't know the laws in those states very well, but I do believe they are slightly different than in California. Are homeschooled, next question is, are homeschooled children entering school prior to 7th grade held to the kinder vaccination list expectations as new students. So homeschooled children or children who come under independent study programs are not required to have any vaccination documentation. So it's kind of interesting that they are not even focusing on any, they don't require any documentation. So if you have a homeschooled student, there are also online schools that count as that. There are charter schools that provide independent study programs. All of those are not required to have any vaccination policy. Some of them ask for it, but they're not actually required to have any vaccination documentation.
Christina, what about for kids who have been homeschooled previously and are entering the public or private school sector?
So those, yes, they have to have, if they have a personal belief exemption on file, those can be transferred over if they're not entering kindergarten or 7th grade. If they are transferring from homeschool to a public or private school at kindergarten or 7th grade, the personal belief exemption doesn't hold anymore. They would have to meet the vaccine requirements or have a medical exemption or an IEP or, yeah. So another question, a document written by a lawyer for IEP students would be a good investment to have available. It could just be enough to scare the school and let it go. One more brick removed for the, yes. So it is something we need. What we need is somebody, we need somebody who runs up against that. So if there is somebody out there that has an IEP and the school is not allowing you allowing you into school because of that, that's the person that we need in order for a lawyer to write the sort of letter to scare them. A lawyer can write just a generic informational letter, but it's usually not as it's not as scaring or as it's not taken as seriously as if there is an actual person that they are putting it in for the cause of. There's another question. FYI, I registered my child for Girl Scout camp on the form and put exempted, even though we have a personal belief. It didn't seem to matter. She was accepted into the camp. We were in the East Bay. Yeah, so Girl Scout camp and other camps, I don't think they're looking at it as seriously. They really don't want to get a lawsuit, so they're putting it out there for parents just to get the information, but they're up until now I haven't heard of a single camp or organization that is requiring vaccine records, and they are, and so I would say, you know, put something and sort of take it to that first step of saying you're exempt, saying you have personal belief exemption, saying that you're up to date in your mind, whatever that means, and see what pushback you get. If you get pushback, then we're happy to help advocate for you. But we have lawyers that can help you if it comes to that. But I would say, push back the one step, because they don't want legal suits, and so for the most part, they're just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Christina, we have one more question in the chat box. If we have young children entering preschool and want to delay vaccinations, even if only by a few months, is it best to start school on a conditional admission, or will this call further undue attention to your family? Who follows up on the specific timeline you mentioned? Will we face difficulties on day one if we're not fully up to date?
So preschools and daycare they're another gray area. So when you enter preschool, the preschool will ask you for your vaccination records. Now they have a timeline of, okay, by 12 months, these are the vaccinations the child is supposed to have. By 14 months, these are the vaccinations the child is supposed to have. If you're not up to date, I really think it's on an individual by individual basis at this point with the preschools and the daycares. Your records will be on file. They are, they're licensed, and so they will be required to show those records to whoever comes and does the spot checks. I think, again, it's on an individual basis. Some licensing people are very, very big sticklers for what's in that record, what's in that document, that student's record. Others are going around and worrying about the whether you've got the the covers for the plugs, or whether you're, you've got the right amount of, you've got a shelving system that's not attached to the wall and that kind of thing. So it really depends on the preschool. I would go and talk to the preschool director. They are supposed to be up to date. I'm not sure from a conditional admissions. I actually would need to look, and I would look on the Shots for School website and see what the conditional admission requirements are for daycares and preschools. I'm not sure that there is a specific, as for kindergarten and 7th grade, I know there's a very specific, you have to have this done within 30 days. You have to have this done within, the next 30 days. For preschool and daycare, I'm not sure what the situation is. I would also say, I would go and talk to your doctor about a medical exemption. Is the reason why you're spacing them out because you're concerned for adverse reactions? If it is, would your provider would your physician give a medical exemption, even if it's just a temporary medical exemption, that you can do it on your own schedule? Again, it's something that it's a very specific individual person by person, child by child thing that I would say, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I can't give you, medical advice. I can't give you legal advice, but I can give you my opinion of how to move forward with it. From that perspective. But I do think from the daycare and the childcare piece of it, and the preschool piece of it, they're again more of a gray area when it comes to what is actually required at each individual month by month.
And the other thing too is that a lot of daycares and preschools are also scrambling because of a new law called SB277,
right,
which requires their workers to be vaccinated for certain diseases and parent volunteers as well. So they're really, they are totally spending way too many resources on this. That law is even more, it's a really vague, weird law requiring certain vaccines, but you can't get individualized, for instance, pertussis or measles vaccines.
Yeah.
So it's I did a presentation for a local preschool recently, and they were just really unsure about what to do about it. So if you guys have any last questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We want to start wrapping up. You guys have been so patient, and I really appreciate the questions you've been asking. I have a couple more slides, one more thing I want to present here. So basically how to proceed from here. Number one is, starting with this video, this webinar, is educate yourself. Get your hands on every document you possibly can. Go to Christina's website, read what she's got available. Go to my website, see what I have available. Bug your practitioner about getting those inserts and reading them. You can also access them online sometimes through Merck. Like you can go to the Merck website and try to access some of those inserts. I urge people to consult with holistic healthcare providers who really understand the genetic markers and the different autoimmune conditions, the side effects of vaccinations, and obviously how to boost the immune system naturally. No one wants to harm their child, right? That's why some of us don't vaccinate. That's why some people do vaccinate. They don't want their child to get hurt. So I really urge you to work with people for your specific conditions. I work with people. I can refer you out to people. Christina has a whole database of people. I urge you to be noisy. Talk to people. Attend the rallies. Attend the vigils. Contact your legislatures. Contact your assembly people. Contact your senators. Contact even your U.S. House of Representatives person. Contact your U.S. senator. And really be vocal. Talk to your friends. There are more people. I tell you, I'm at the VA part-time, and I'm shocked at the amount of people who actually agree with, who have the same perspective that I do. They'll only talk about it behind closed doors or in whispered tones, but there are people out there. So be noisy, make a racket, and make an informed decision by all means. Really educate yourself. Whatever decision you choose for your child, if you make an informed decision, it's going to be the right decision for you. So Christina and I aren't here to tell you one way or the other, this is what you have to do for your child. It's so personal, and I get that, and I respect that. So just feel good about your decision, feel empowered about your decision, and that's going to be the right decision for your family. Christina, what do you want to add to that?
I'm going to just reiterate two things that you said. One of them is that, and I'll take a step back, but I think the one silver lining of SB277 is that it woke people up. And I say this all the time, but it got people like you and me talking openly about vaccines. I had done a lot of research, and my inner family knew that I didn't vaccinate my kids, but I didn't. And I did presentations to people who were pregnant, who were already had the door open. So like hypnobirthing or groups that were already on the alternative side. But since SB277, I sit in Starbucks and I start talking to people, person comes in and they're pregnant, and I'm just like, and to me, the important thing is to go to where they're at. So to find out kind of, have you thought about vaccinating? Have you done your research? And most people are just like, oh, no, I don't, I'm not bothered. I'm not interested in that. And it's kind of working out where they're at and going there and just planting the seed of do your research. Because as I said, for the most part, I think people who do their research will come out knowing and making a decision not to vaccinate or to vaccinate slowly. But even if they do their research and come out saying, I absolutely want to vaccinate, at least they've made an informed choice, which I would say the majority of the population right now is not making informed decisions on vaccinations. They're going with what their doctor said, and what we've shown is that the doctors are influenced by money and by the pharmaceutical companies. Their schooling is heavily subsidized by the pharmaceutical companies, paid for by the pharmaceutical companies. Their research and all of that kind of stuff. And so, to me, do that moment of find a person every day. That's my challenge. And it's there's somebody else, Dana Corman, who has a be one less moment. So find one person every day that you share information on vaccines to, and just so that they question, because we need that groundswell. We're not there in terms of public opinion, because people aren't thinking about vaccines. People aren't thinking about this. So, when she says be noisy, I say my answer is I challenge you to just talk to one person a day. Just share information on it, even if it's just, did you know that the vaccine manufacturers can't be sued? Those kinds of things. And we have flyers on our website that can help with that. The other thing that I really, really harp on, and it's because we have our advocacy side, getting to know your senator, your assembly member. Show up at their coffee mornings, show up at their, any event that they're at, so that they know, have a meeting with them, that they know who you are and what you stand for. I think that was one of the biggest things with SB277, is that we didn't have those relationships prior to SB277. And so when SB277 came along, we were all struggling to have meetings with our senators, but we were just, the average person off the street, which they should listen to us, but having that relationship with them, that when you walk in the door and you say, this is what I feel about something, and they listen to you, that relationship is priceless, because we have to work with the legislature. As much as I would prefer not to have to work with them, they're the ones making the laws. And we're in an election year, so we can change those people that were in the legislature the last 2 years. And so find out who's running in your district. Is it an incumbent? Is it somebody, if it is, then get to know them. If it isn't, if there is somebody running against them, go in and educate them about vaccinations, because most of them have no idea. Find out what their opinion is. Find out, is it better to have the evil that you know versus the evil that you don't know? If they're, for example, 2 Democrats running, find out who those people are. We can make a difference this election cycle, even if you're voting in somebody that's still a Democrat who are very much for this policy, but that didn't vote on it, and so has a clean voting record on it if we were to bring in legislation next year or the year after to overturn SB277. So those are my two, if you're going to do anything, those 2 things are the things to do.
Absolutely. Totally second all of that. Before I'll take this off in a second, but just so you guys have our contact information. Like I said, Christina is an amazing resource. You're always welcome to email me as well. I try to answer all my emails personally. So I also have an incredible assistant, Rachel. So sometimes if she's more knowledgeable about something, especially food, she's an incredible chef, I'll have her email people back. But I'm available at Jennifer@earthbasedmedicine.com. And Christina's available at Christina@avoiceforchoice.com. I'm going to stop my screen share just for a second so we can say goodbye to you guys. Okay, hold on. We got 2 last questions. Okay, so Be Found has a question about personal family. That's definitely something to take up with your doctor as far as your specific family member risk. All doctors, the doctors who are writing the exemptions, who are examining this, are doing it on a case-by-case basis. So there's no cookie-cutter approach. That's your family history is definitely something you want to bring up with your providers. That's absolutely something you want to bring up. And do general practitioners also receive the same $400 bonus for up-to-date children? I think they do, right, Christina?
I believe they do. I believe it's a insurance by insurance case. But I also know that general practitioners are less, they're not as heavily, so they receive the bonus, but they don't get as much flack for not having fully vaccinated people in their practice. So because general practitioners are usually family practitioners and have many more adults in their population and just a different makeup, it's not just children. It's harder for the insurance companies to kind of say, okay, you have to have a 95% vaccination rate. So I think family practitioners are definitely more likely or less likely to push the whole vaccination piece. And I know there are family practitioners that people have gone to instead of pediatricians that have found that. But again, I think it's an individual case-by-case basis.
All right, Christina, before we wrap up, is there any last words you would like to add?
I don't think so. Just if anyone has any questions, feel free to email either of us, both of us.
Yeah. Okay, you guys. So you've been super patient. This went longer than I thought, but I am so glad that we were able to ask or answer your questions as much as we could. Please email us. It is such an honor to serve you.
Yep.
It's so important that we feel empowered in the healthcare choices that we make, no matter what that decision might be. It's not up for me or anyone to tell you how to treat your body or your child's body. And I really bow to you for the hard work that you do as parents as well. And so we're going to be putting this up on YouTube, like I said, in a couple of days. I'll send a newsletter out about it, so you can find it in different places. Check your inbox. It'll come from either info@earthbasedmedicine.com or jennifer@earthbasedmedicine.com. So we'll sign off here. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you for your sweet messages coming into the chat.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, you are so welcome. Like I said, It's an honor to serve you. We will, if you guys just keep sending us your questions, because Christina and I can always collaborate again in the future. So This is not a one-stop shop. In the meantime, have a great night, and we'll see you guys again in the future, okay?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.